Welcome to Shift Talk, where we talk about the workforce challenges and trends that manufacturers and those in the supply chain industry are facing every day. I'm your host, Adam Raymond, and in each episode, we'll bring you fun and in-depth conversations with industry experts and thought leaders who are on the front lines of frontline work. I'm here with Chris Luecke from the Manufacturing Happy Hour. Really excited to have him here. He's got about 18,000 people who are following his podcast. So it's awesome to have somebody join ours. Chris, if you don't mind, do a quick intro about how you started Manufacturing Happy Hour.
Yeah, happy to. I appreciate your intro as well. Despite being a manufacturing podcast, I tell folks Manufacturing Happy Hour is like a leadership podcast disguised as a manufacturing podcast. So sales, personal branding, leadership, recruiting the next generation. But Manufacturing Happy Hour really started off as what I like to call a campy video series on an iPhone. But this was back in 2016 when not many people were leveraging video in the manufacturing industry. So my thought was, hey, I'm perfectly comfortable being on camera. I've played in bands. I've been on stage before. I did college radio. Like, why not I try to just record some stuff on my iPhone in the lab and just talk about automation the way you would talk about it over a beer? Because as the listeners here know, the manufacturing industry can be full of buzzwords. We use a lot of jargon to say not a lot sometimes.
I don't know what
like,
you're
hey,
talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So my thought was, let's literally crack a beer and talk about it. Let's talk about topics candidly as if you were having a drink with someone. So that's a bit of the history on Manufacturing Happy Hour and how it got started.
That's awesome. In fact, I actually wanted to bring up a recording you did recently with Jason T. Ray. That was really interesting because everyone's talking about the skills gap in manufacturing, but he had a slightly different take that I actually agree with.
Yeah, so it feeds right into the theme of Manufacturing Happy Hour. So Jason T. Ray, co-founder of a great company called Paperless Parts, they really help machine shops modernize and digitize, helping them with their digital processes to better run their shops. So he's been running this successfully for a long time. And we were talking about the skills gap on the show because his client base, machine shops, largely across the US, right? That's a prime spot where folks are experiencing what we call the skills gap. They're having trouble hiring. They're having trouble retaining their talent.
Yep.
And Jason had a great perspective on this. He's like, we talk about the skills gap a lot in manufacturing, but when we know something has been an issue for that long, at some point it becomes a management gap. I like to call it a leadership gap. Like, people need to look themselves in the mirror and say, if I am continuing to struggle to bring in talent, yes, there are some macro issues out there that are making this a challenge, but what can I do? How can I own this situation and improve my culture, improve the technology I have inside of my facility to make this place more attractive to people that might come work here? And then once they're here, I need the stuff to get them to stay as well. So I completely agree with you. That is a great take. And it's often a lot of the ways I lead off a lot of my conversations as well when the skills gap comes up in a discussion these days.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, we talk to dozens of different manufacturers across the country each week, and it's always the same position, right? We're struggling to find people, bigger struggle just to get them to stay. And so we can't develop their skills. And so we pivot the conversation to what's really the issue. It's not the skills. You can teach those. It's how are you going about attracting? What are you making the job about? What's the culture inside your four walls? And what are you doing to put things in front of that worker to get him excited to keep coming back? Mentorship is a huge deal because you've got all these folks who are aging out of this workforce, and that institutional knowledge is going to walk out the door with them. What are you seeing companies do to negate that?
Yeah, that's a great point because I was talking about, hey, how do you hire and how do you create a culture to get folks to stay? But a part of that is, what type of training opportunities do you have when they're there? How do you get folks to continue to upskill when you have them within your organization? And what do you do to capture that? The common term people use in industry is tribal knowledge that's walking out the door. And I'll give a specific example because there are companies out there. Swipe Guide is a company that I just went on tour with, for example. We did a couple road show dates of manufacturing happy hour through meetups at breweries, live podcasts. We even did a comedy night. It was a lot of fun, but I want to talk about what Swipe Guide does as a company as well. They create how-tos and instruction manuals to really empower the frontline worker. And it's companies like that I would say organizations need to be looking at now to say, hey, Bob is here for 5, 10 more years if we're lucky. What do we do to start capturing Bob's knowledge in our system so that way not only our new team members can start learning to do things the way that Bob had done them, but how do we make these like more real-time documents? How do we continue
Right.
to evolve these as technology evolves? So that's why I'm big on companies like Swipe Guide that are not only providing that information right at the fingertips of the frontline worker, but I think what's more important is they are empowering that frontline worker to make more decisions, to be someone that, let's say, has a real pull in how that plant operates.
No, that's a great story. I love hearing that. I do want to come back to something you were talking about, engaging workers of today, Gen Z, millennials. They have a different mindset about what work is. And I think there's a huge gap in the perspective of what, like you said, leadership sees these workers as. I hear it all the time. They're just lazy. They don't want to work. What's your take on what's really happening out there?
Yeah, I think that's a little indicative of the conversation we were having not too long ago, right? Where it's not a skills gap at that point, it's a management gap. And this isn't just a now issue. There's differences with every generation throughout history. And I've loved looking back at showing people have taken pictures of news articles from 1900 or 1920, 1940, and the narrative is the same throughout modern history, let's say. There's always this thought that the next generation's lazy, entitled, doesn't
Right.
want to work, etc. The leaders that I see doing it are adaptable. They
Mm,
understand that the next generation, millennials, Gen Z, even Gen X, have different work preferences, different work styles. What
right.
they are doing is finding ways to allow that to allow them to thrive in the way, let's say, a millennial like myself would thrive, right? Like, I am a remote worker through and through. That doesn't mean I'm not going to come to the office or show up when there's a meaningful meeting or just on a regular basis, because I understand there are great conversations that have there when you're collaborating with team members on a regular basis. I look at companies like Miller Resource Group, for example. They're a longtime recruiting firm in the manufacturing industry. I talk about them a lot. I could reference a lot of stories about them, but I think Gary Miller as a leader has done a great job with prepping that organization for the future. I'm a big advocate of personal branding and empowering team members to represent the company they work for. I think Miller Resource Group has done a really good job of that in having team members that are out there on social media. In fact, I was literally just commenting on one of their posts this morning right before this podcast. One of the Miller Resource team members was sharing an insight about the industry. It wasn't necessarily related to his job at Miller Resource Group specifically, but it was an industry insight that's helping me build trust with that individual. We talked about the frontline worker earlier. How do we empower frontline workers? How do we empower full teams? And I think companies that are doing that, and Miller Resource Group is the example I just gave here, those are the companies that are going to succeed in the long run.
Yeah. I love those talking points, right? About every generation is different. I'm sure boomers caught shit from the Great Depression era workers who were like, man, these people are lazy. They don't want to work 20 hours a day.
I'm sure the greatest generation, like as they're called, I think the silent generation. I'm sure they had plenty of things to say about the way
Right.
boomers were working at that point, right? So that's what scares me. Sometime we got okay boomer right now as a term. Someday it's going to be okay millennial, and that's as I watch time fly by, I realize that's not that far in the
Yeah,
distant future.
exactly. I do want to get back to what you were just talking though, because I think it's super important. And I know you're a big advocate for this, which is personal branding. And I know that scares the shit out of most HR people. All they think of is Oh my God, I cannot have people just randomly posting on LinkedIn. It's going to need to go through marketing and HR to make sure they're not saying something they shouldn't and that they're saying the right thing. How do you go about teaching companies, organizations to embrace that?
Yeah, great question. I love talking about this. There are a few elements to this, and I'll start off with one of the most basic. If you trust your people to be in front of customers in general, social media is just a digital spot for that to go down, right? So that's step one. If you have the trust to have folks represent your company enough that you've hired them, you should probably find a way to trust them on social media as well. The other thing I would say is it does need to be a two-way street. And what I mean by that is marketers and leadership should embrace the people on their team that have voices on social media, podcasts, in the digital world. And the folks that are out there doing that, individual contributors that may have an outsized voice on LinkedIn, for example, they need to be getting familiar with the company brand as well. Because,
Right.
yeah, you are hired by a company. So you want to make sure that, hey, yes, this is your own style. People to people trust things when they come out of the mouths of a person versus a brand. There are lots of stats that back that up. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure there's alignment there and that you understand the voice of the company. And I've seen a lot of great marketing organizations. They'll even pre-create content for folks. I think that's a great way for someone to get started
Yeah.
creating
Explain that a little
content.
more. Like, what did you see them do?
Yeah, there's sales enablement tools that you can build like social posts into where it's like, hey, here's some articles we just published. Here's some insights about some industries we served. They pre-write the posts for you. And
Oh,
that's
that's great.
inside of the sales enablement tool available to sales folks, other people in the company to basically share it as native content of their own. And I think this is a great tool because let's say someone's new to social media, they might not understand what their voice is yet. This is a great way to understand the brand voice and be like, okay, I see how the brand is talking. I see how my company's talking. They're speaking like this. I'm like this. Let me try to find a spot that's right in the middle where it's like, hey, this feels natural for me. It's going to feel natural for the folks that are consuming that content. And it's going to be a win. I think one of the common fears, particularly from, let's say, leadership of a company, they might worry that what if so and so goes online and says the wrong thing? And
Exactly.
my first comeback to that is if you look at the shelf life of an average social media post, the reality is there is a very, very slim chance that it would get any traction or go viral. The reality is it's just going to get swallowed up by the algorithm very quickly and it's going to disappear into the abyss.
Right.
And this is where the two-way street is so important, right? Where if you have, let's say, a marketing organization and the people on the team working together, go in and say, hey, we love that you're sharing content, right? This is me as a marketing person. We love that you're out there sharing content. You mentioned a post like this. Hey, actually, we use some language that's a bit around this. If you could use that in the next one, great. Don't use it as an opportunity to be like, you said the wrong thing. You should never post again. So that way, that whole relationship improves over time. Individuals are getting out there sharing more of the right message. And then the marketing organization, the leadership of the organization, they all of a sudden have a lot of different brand advocates out there. I love when you see that kind of synergy of those organizations working together. And I see companies, for example, like Gray Solutions do a really good job about that. They're probably one of the best systems integrators I know in the automation space right now. And one of the reasons I trust the company so much is I see the vibe of the individuals that work at the company, the insights they share. I get a sneak peek inside of the culture of the company. So that's a company that I think does a really good job of that two-way street. Again, it's all about empowering the people that work for you. It's about trusting them. You're hiring them to make your company better, whether they're a frontline employee on the production line or whether they're a salesperson or a marketer.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And when you really think about it, when you and I go to decide to make a purchase on something, how often do we trust what the brand that makes that product says about it? We all know it's bullshit. It's what marketing came up with. I go right to the reviews. Okay, so what are people really saying about this? And I think that's the bridge that personal branding within manufacturing builds. You get to see the wins and the mistakes, and they're willing to admit that and work through it. I think that's a huge opportunity for, companies that have been too afraid to take that leap because of those possible mistakes. A lot of times marketing can end up ingesting that information, that content, and it actually becomes some of the best performing content and sales messaging you could use because it's how people really talk.
Oh, absolutely. And you might have seen my eyes wandering slightly because I'm like, I got some stats to back this up. I'm going to pull them up.
Yeah,
Like,
go for it.
I'm just going to give you a few right here. Why should companies care about personal brands? Because people are, one, they're 16 times more likely to read a post from a friend than one from a brand. They're also 92% more likely to trust recommendations from friends and family over any type of marketing. So those are just a couple of those. The other fun one, actually, this is a great example of why you should empower team members, is folks are 3 times more likely to trust company information shared by an employee versus the CEO, right? Because the CEO, for example, is usually a little more tied to the brand than a regular
Right.
employee, right? So
Right.
it's, of course the CEO is going to say this about the company. So, but it's a great way to say, hey, if you can get these brand advocates that are by their own volition choosing to be brand advocates. Yes, they like working for the company, but now they're going out there and taking time out of their day to say how much they like working for the company or what they've learned from working there, insights they know about the industry. Oh, by the way, they happen to be an employee of this company. Like, it all adds up. So it feels like empowerment is just going to be the theme of our conversation today. But hey, empower the front lines, empower the voices in your organization, because those are going to build brand equity with the customers, the prospects that you want to reach.
I love that. One other thing you've mentioned in the past too is like, as a company, thinking outside your 4 walls, right? I'd love to hear more about the impact manufacturers have like in their local communities that they may not realize.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because one of my missions at Manufacturing Happy Hour is to connect manufacturing with the local culture, the local community. I think when I think of getting outside the 4 walls of the factory, the first thing is not being so insular to what's going on inside of the company that you miss what's taking place outside in the real world. And I think social media is a great tool to do that digitally. Like, you are digitally escaping the 4 walls of your factory, the 4 walls of your building,
Right.
to get in front of the industry, get a reality check for what's going on, getting a reality check for what people think about your company. That part's critically important. But I also think, especially, we're a few years out of COVID right now, a couple of years out of COVID, where we were locked down, we weren't being as social as we used to. There's an incredible amount of importance in getting out there and being part of events in the manufacturing world in your community, whether it's a local technology council, whether it's a chapter of a larger manufacturing organization. That's where you're gonna meet new people. You're gonna get in front of new folks that can impact your career, not necessarily today, but maybe in the long run. And it just gives you, I think, that reality check is so important. Like, one of the things that I always found valuable when I worked for a large organization was escaping just the vibe of that company every once in a while and seeing, hey, what's going on elsewhere in industry, and what can I learn from them? And what can I learn from them that I can take back to the organization, so that way we can make it better,
Yeah,
right? You're not
exactly.
doing, I want to be very clear. The point of doing this isn't to go look for another job per se. The point of doing it is to be awesome at your career now and in the future. And the now portion of that includes bringing great ideas back to your own company.
Yeah, no, those are great suggestions. I've seen a number of companies taking a route. Again, they're used to thinking, okay, well, physical 4 walls. We're going to go work with local schools, middle schools, high schools. I worked prior to this for a technology education company that was great at partnering with manufacturers to bring people in from those local facilities to show the future workforce, hey, these are the kinds of jobs in manufacturing. It's not just hot, hard work for 12-hour shifts all day. Like, there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of robotics, there's a lot of STEM going on in manufacturing. And there are some really cool career paths with some incredibly good salary possibilities in these industries that you probably never thought of. Instead, like, without even a college degree, you could be making 6 figures after just a few years in a lot of these jobs. And kids aren't even made aware of that. They're just told, oh, you got to go off to 4-year college and go spend $100,000 in a degree or go work at McDonald's. Right? That's the only two choices you got.
Yeah, and I do think that stigma is finally changing. I'll say a couple things. From a manufacturing happy hour standpoint, one of the reasons that the platform of manufacturing happy hour isn't just a podcast, but it's also an event series is
Yeah.
we got to meet the next generation where they are. That's why I've done things like comedy showcases, featuring local comedians, doing local music showcases. I think of South by Southwest a lot because that was a spot that I went to when I was right out of college where I was going for the music, right? And then all of a sudden I realized there was a tech conference associated with it as well. And then a few years later, I was moving to San Francisco, California, right? So because they were doing such a good job of connecting tech with culture, I got exposed to the opportunities that existed in that space. I think we have the same opportunity today it's one thing to get 8th graders, high schoolers to walk the show floor at a big manufacturing conference on the last day of the show, right?
Right.
That's good stuff. You need to do that. You need to get folks exposed. You need to get them exposed to it at an early age. They need to see the technology. That's part of the solution. But I do think there's another part of the solution. Again, getting out of those four walls of meeting the next generation where they are. The other thing I'll say is tech schools, universities, the good ones are adapting to the new education landscape, the new job landscape. About a year ago, I interviewed Richard Barnhouse, who's the president of Waukesha County Technical College, and we were talking about how they're developing programs around artificial intelligence and systems integration and IoT. They're working those things into the curriculum. And by the way, they're going out to talk to the local manufacturers in their area to say, what are the things you need? What are the things we need to be training folks on? That way they can get jobs in this community. That's a huge part of the partnership right there. Companies talking to educators and vice versa to figure out what's missing right now, what do we need in the future, and start building curriculum around that today.
Oh, I love that. Because no matter what your take on AI is, it's going to be integrated into these jobs in the future. There are still going to be plenty of humans needed to do this work, especially in manufacturing, and getting ahead of that curve is what's going to help them, right?
I have zero concern about AI taking anyone's job until we can start filling the ridiculously large amount of jobs that are sitting open right now. I just look at it, man, is AI going to replace some jobs? Of course it will. That's what technology has done for centuries. We used to be an agrarian society not that long ago, and now we're an industrial society. Things will change, and as humans, we can adapt, and I have full faith in humanity to do that. We've done it before. We'll do it again.
So, to wrap up, would love to hear what your future plans for the manufacturing happy hour has in store for the rest of 2024, some of the events you're doing, how people can follow you on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. So, if you look up Chris Luecke on LinkedIn, send a connection request, include a note, say, hey, I heard about you on Adam's podcast. I will happily accept that connection request. Last name is 6 letters. It's spelled Luecke for anyone that wants to find me and wants to get that right. But what's coming up with Manufacturing Happy Hour? We have a very fun summer and fall ahead. So I referenced the fact that I was on tour earlier. We're going on another tour. We're going to Milwaukee on Wednesday, July 31st, and then we'll be throwing an end of summer party with Making Chips, another great podcast in the manufacturing space. That's going to be on Thursday, August 15th. And that tour is really a lead up to the big IMTS show taking place September 9th through 14th in Chicago. One of the largest manufacturing conferences in the world, happens every 2 years here in the United States. Over 80,000 manufacturing leaders are showing up to this, and I have more than a few events up my sleeve for that as well, so I can tell you that much.
Really appreciate you coming on the show, Chris.
Absolutely. Great conversation, Adam. I will see you around the industry soon.